Welcome to What is Next for Ukraine and Europe with Dmytro Kuleba. We are extraordinarily lucky to have him here as our guest. I'm Elizabeth Wood, and I'm the faculty director for the MIT Ukraine program and a professor in the history department. My co-moderator is Carol Saivetz, who is senior research associate at the Center for Security Studies.
Securities program, yes. Try that, yes.
And at the Center for International Studies. Before I say a word about our speaker, I want to briefly thank our co-sponsors, the Center for International Studies, the Security Studies program, and the MIT Ukraine program. I especially want to thank Michelle English, Sarah Zakaria, Svetlana Krasinska, and Maria Montague, who helped us make this event. As you can see, we have an intro slide that had a QR code for future events that will be coming up. The Center for International Studies has a number of very interesting events for the rest of the spring. If you didn't catch the QR code, sound? I'm getting a timeout signal from the boss.
Your mic isn't on.
My mic isn't on. The room sounds live. But you heard me. Well, we'll start with the important part when we get there. I'm about to introduce you. Could be. The only thing that really matters. Yeah, testing 1, 2, 3. Oh, it's not going into video. Yeah. So will everybody bear with us. Since we want to have a good video of this, we have to make sure everything's working right. Oh, you think is that something? No, mine is live. Yeah, it sounds like.
Oh. Obviously, I wasn't standing still enough. So I think we're ready to begin. And I'll just say again, welcome. I'm the director of the MIT Ukraine program and a professor of history. My colleague is Carol Saivetz from the Security Studies program. And we're delighted to welcome Dmytro Kuleba. Mr. Kuleba is a Ukrainian politician and diplomat, as we all know, who was Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine from 2020 to 2024 in the very hardest years of the onset of the war, and also in the years before the war, which is an important part of the story. He is now a non-resident senior fellow at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at that other university up the road that need not be named, MIT's eternal rival, Harvard. We're incredibly lucky to have you so close by. The youngest foreign affairs minister in Ukraine's history, Mr. Kuleba led Ukraine's diplomacy through, as I say, its most challenging times during Russian aggression. He played a key role in building alliances, securing arms, imposing sanctions, advancing Ukraine's EU and NATO bids, and expanding ties with the rest of the world. He's recently authored 2 books, which I think you might want to know about, especially if you're Ukrainian speaking. One is The War for Reality: How to Win in the World of Fakes, Truths, and Communities, published by a Ukrainian publisher called Knizhkovy Lev, which means the book lion, was published in 2023, which focuses on information warfare and its relevance for today's society. Even more recently, in 2024, he brought together a variety of public figures to publish a book called War and the New Horizons. He has a PhD in international law in 2006 and an undergraduate degree from the Institute of International Relations at Taras Shevchenko University in Kyiv. In the past, he's worked at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Permanent Mission of Ukraine to the OSCE. He's served as advisor to the Deputy Prime Minister of Ukraine for Humanitarian Affairs. He's served as Ambassador at Large in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He was in 2016, he was appointed as Ambassador, Permanent Representative of Ukraine to the Council of Europe. From 2019 to 2020, he was Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic integration of Ukraine. And then in 2020, he became Minister of Foreign Affairs for Ukraine. I want to encourage you, as you're listening, to think about questions at the end. Carol Saivetz and I will ask a few questions to launch, to kick it off, but we welcome your questions and hope that you will identify yourself if you have a question. Please make it a question. We don't want to hear grandstanding. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Kuleba to the front.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad to be here, coming from the place whose name that should not be named. I get the rules. So I do not want to deliver like a lecture. I think the more we talk, the better it is, the more appropriate and relevant my responses will be to your needs. I will just briefly outline where we are, what happens, and where we may be heading to kind of kick off our discussion. So when President Trump was heading into his inauguration, he basically stood on a crossroad where he had to choose how he's going to deliver on his promise to end the war fast, in a quick way. Right? We all understand that 24 hours was a campaign promise. Reality is different from campaigning. But anyway, he wanted a quick solution. So he adopted a strategy which I would describe as sticks for Ukraine and carrots for Russia. And he believed that this strategy will help him to get both sides to the point where he will be able to deliver a good deal. Right? Many people, thoughtful, energetic, realistic, actually believed that this was going to happen. And while being here in February, I heard them saying that deal is coming, Trump is going to make it, and Ukraine should prepare for the worst. Now, it doesn't mean we don't have to prepare for the worst, but the fact is that there is no deal, right? And after some very active rounds of talking, after some acts of coercion, after some acts of encouragement and alignment with Moscow, we still do not see the result because nothing happened. The war continues. So today, in my view, President Trump stands on the second crossroad, where he came to the conclusion that the previous strategy did not work, and he has to amend it. He has to do something in order to continue pursuing his goal. Perhaps, we don't know it yet, but perhaps he has begun losing interest in this deal. We shouldn't ignore this option either, but he is definitely at the turning point where he has to understand what needs to change in the way he operates this whole project in order for him to succeed. And this is where I personally find it difficult for him to find the way out, because the most obvious solution would be to balance sticks and carrots, but for both. But it doesn't seem to be happening. He doesn't seem to be willing to apply any sticks to Russia. So we should hope that there are people on his team creative enough to come up with a solution, because if they really want to achieve the result they are seeking. In the meantime, Ukrainians do not really feel the impact of any negotiation. I mean, if you watch the news, if you follow social media, and you see a lot of things happening, it seems that something is changing, that something is moving somewhere. But if you live in Kiev, you don't really feel that. Every night you're being attacked with missiles and drones. Every night someone gets killed. Every day there are attacks on the front line and counterattacks. Fighting is going on. And these two realities, they happily coexist. And it's very important to keep both of those realities in sight. Because if you focus on one reality where you see President Trump, President Zelensky, President Putin, and his entourage making all kinds of statements, talking to each other, you may get a completely wrong, a distorted picture of what is going on. If you only stick to the reality on the ground and ignore a broader effort, you will get it wrong as well. So please, at this point, just keep in mind that these realities unhappily coexist. In one world, there is a lot of diplomacy taking place, which makes some people believe that there is a chance that things are moving towards peace. But then you wake up in the morning in Kiev or in any other Ukrainian city, and you don't really get a feeling that there is anything happening beyond that. Today, Ukrainians, the strategic dilemma that preoccupies Ukraine today is this. So Ukraine knows what is at stake, and it will continue fighting. Not because it wants war, no one suffers more from this conflict than Ukraine, but because it understands that the price of losing the war is much higher than the price of running the war, of continuing the war. The problem that Ukraine faces vis-a-vis Trump is the following. President Putin does not want this war to end because he believes that he is on a trajectory of winning it. And there are two schools of thought in analyzing Putin. The first one is mostly represented by Western scholars and pundits who argue that Putin is a rational person and he came to get something very specific from Ukraine, like a land corridor to Crimea, recognition of the legal belonging of Crimea to Russia, and the non-NATO status of Ukraine. So if we give all of this to him, he will stop, right? This is the rational analysis that many fancy. The second school of thought says that Putin is a rational person indeed, but he came for all of Ukraine, that he wants to subjugate the whole country because this is his historic mission. And these two schools, they sometimes disagree with each other, and they engage in discussion because the first school believes that the second school is traumatized, biased, and therefore is deprived of the ability to judge the situation rationally. And the second school believes that the first just doesn't get things right, which is a part of an intellectual debate that our civilization usually benefits from, but that benefit comes at a cost. And in this case, the cost is the lives of Ukrainians. So within this framework, if you accept that it doesn't matter to which school you belong, the fact is this. Putin's toolkit of concessions to Trump is much bigger than the toolkit of Zelensky. So whatever your end goal is, whether you want a land corridor, Crimea, and no NATO, or you want all of it, all of Ukraine, every step you make to keep Trump on your side comes at expense. You're paying a price. And Putin can tell Trump, Donald, here is the US citizen that I had put in prison years ago, and now you can have him. Here is a deal on the Arctic. Here is the deal on Iran. Here is the deal on North Korea. There are many things that Putin can do which are unrelated to Ukraine. But everything Zelensky can do is related to Ukraine. And the best way to explain this dilemma is probably the minerals deal, right, that all of you heard about. So when Ukrainians look at this deal, whatever its content is, it's a different story. We can talk about it, but this is not an issue now. So if the problem is that President Trump says, I want minerals. President Zelensky says, okay, what will you do in response? And President Trump replies, trust me. Like, everything will be fine, trust me. And Zelensky says, fine, I'm very much willing to trust you, but could you please get more specific? And President Trump gets irritated. So when Zelensky comes back home, the question for Ukraine is this. If this mineral deal is the price of keeping President Trump in good mood without getting any specific commitments from him, then what will be the price of specific commitments? It will definitely be higher than the price of just keeping him in the good mood. There are very few things that Ukraine can offer in that sense. While Putin has a range of issues he can offer to Trump to win time while pursuing his goals. And this is what you are going to see if nothing changes in the US approach. What you're going to see, you're going to see more talks, more phone calls, more conversations, more statements that we are moving there. But in reality, nothing is going to change. The war will continue. Because Putin will be offering big deals to Trump. Trump will be saying to his people, but you see, Vladimir is making some good proposals. We should not alienate him. We should keep talking to him. And Ukraine will have nothing to offer, not much to offer. Trump will be getting irritated with Ukraine. And in the meantime, Ukraine will be producing more weapons. Putin will be conscripting more men. And the escalation of the war will become inevitable. So this is the trajectory that we currently are on. Please, we should also remember that although President Trump 1 is different from Trump 2, he started his first tenure in office with the same goal of making a big deal with Putin. He spent 4 years trying to do it, and in the end, nothing happened, right? So we shouldn't exclude that this will also be the outcome of this particular effort during his second tenure. Another thing that I would like to draw your attention to is that in theory, President Trump can strike a deal with President Putin. The question is that none of them will be able to enforce it without having Ukraine and the Europeans on board. As long as Ukraine and the Europeans remain aligned, the chances, whatever the language you're hearing towards the Europeans or Ukrainians coming from either Washington or Moscow, this is another thing that brings Putin and Trump together. They genuinely despise Europe. They really believe in it. But enforcing the deal without Ukraine and the European Union is impossible. So if I had been speaking to you a month ago during my visit in February, you would have heard me saying that the United States have 3 real leverages on Ukraine, military-wise. The first one is Patriot interceptors. The second one is intel sharing. And the third one is spare parts for the hardware that was already delivered to Ukraine. This argument, so you remove that, and Ukraine really begins to suffer over time, not immediately, but your air defense runs out of interceptors, and more ballistic missiles begin to land in your cities. Intel sharing undermines your capability to watch the Russians and act in advance. And if you don't get the spare parts and maintenance, your equipment just stalls over time. All of this happens over time. It does not happen immediately. And trust me, there will not be a moment when you open the news and read Ukrainian front collapses. Right? This is not going to happen. But some days ago, and these are the leverages that, this is the leverage that President Trump already deployed a month ago by cutting off Ukraine from deliveries and intel sharing. So Ukrainians saw what happened, the Europeans saw what happened, and they started thinking how to actually, first they said, okay, he can do that, now we see that. Then they started looking for solutions. The thing is that there are no immediate solutions to either of these three problems, but there are midterm solutions to them. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I do not want to sound cynical, but Russia helped to undermine one of Trump's leverages, which is Patriot interceptors. That happened just a couple of days ago. So 6 ballistic missiles were fired at Kiev, on Kiev. And for the first time out of 6 missiles, we intercepted only 1. And the spokesperson to our air defense gave a comment saying that our air defense came to the conclusion that these ballistic missiles were upgraded to the extent that Patriots are not capable of intercepting them with the same level of efficiency. Well, if that is true, of course, I'm pretty certain that a lot of brilliant minds here in the United States and in Ukraine are now digging into what happened and how it can be countered to restore the efficiency of Patriots, because the whole air defense of Europe is built on Patriots. And the consequence of what you just said, if this is true, it means that Europe is naked. It is not that it is particularly well protected, shielded even now, but if Russian ballistic missiles cannot be intercepted by Patriots, that creates completely different security reality for Europe as well. But if we know that Patriots do not save us from ballistic missiles, then we come to the conclusion that whether we get them or not, it's good if you get them, but if you don't, we're going to die anyway, right? So, which in terms of thinking diminishes the decision makers, diminishes the importance of the argument. And if you add to that the effort of Ukraine and the Europeans to build up Intel capacity, partially through commercial, through products available on the market. We live in a world where most of the secrets can be found on the internet, or at least in Signal. Listen, I was not going to make that joke, right? These guys they were not lucky because they got caught. Everybody does that. But, and the spare parts, if you build the capacity to repair your equipment with the spare parts produced locally, then you cannot 100% compensate the non-deliveries from the United States, but you can compensate them to some decent extent, which diminishes the leverage. And then why should Ukraine lean under the pressure if we learned how to live without you? Now, the US-Ukraine relationship or the US-Europe relationship is not something that Ukraine or Europe can simply walk away from. And they shouldn't do that, of course. These are not the rules of the game. But learning how to live without the United States while pretending that we live with the United States, this is the art that can be taken under control. And unfortunately, this is more for our transatlantic relationship and strategic security. This is more or less where things are moving. And they're moving there because the pace of technology is stunning. We all know the rule. War is a bad thing, but it's a good thing for technological advancement. And Ukraine has proved it many times over the last 3 years. Of course, the most famous example is our drone industry. We were producing like something slightly more than 0 drones 3 years ago. We will probably produce up to 4 million drones this year of all types. We were fighting for long-range capabilities, for long-range missiles, fiercely fighting with the Biden administration, with the German chancellery a year ago. You don't hear that stuff a lot anymore because we found a different solution, right? So technology is another factor that plays in favor of the continuation of the war, to my deepest regret, is that it's getting cheaper. So the price of of an advanced Russian tank is, let's say, $4.5 million on average. It depends on the equipment you install, but on average it's 4.5. When we started the war, the price of taking that tank out with the Javelin, the anti-tank missile that was our main anti-tank weapon, was $200,000. What the tube is for multiple use is worth $100,000, and the missile that you install in it is worth another $100,000. So $200,000 to take out one tank. Then a more advanced type of weapon came. Don't remember the name. It has the word blade in it. It's a loitering munition. Switchblade, yes. So the price of a switchblade, which is more advanced than a Javelin, is, correct me if I'm wrong, on average $60,000. So the price went down from 200 to 60. Now, but today, most of the Russian tanks are taken out with FPV drones. You are a genius if you can destroy a tank with one FPV drone, and you will be awarded a medal, but usually you need 3 or 4 of them. And the price of that drone, of one drone on average, is $4,000. $2,000. 2 by 4, $2,000 by 4 drones, $8,000 to take out a tank worth $4.1 million. And this is what happened in just 3 years. From $200,000 to take out a tank to $8,000 to take out a tank. Now, since we are at MIT, let me pretend I know technology better than I do. But some say that we're moving towards a war where drones will be fighting each other, operated or autonomous. That's another question. But war gets overly technological. Now, our experience shows that in the end, everything boils down to an infantryman. Because you can have the most advanced type of weapons. You can have drones destroying each other, which already happens when Ukraine knocks out Russian drones by flying over them and just attacking them from the upside. So drones are already fighting each other. But in the end, there must be a man that will cross the field and will jump into the trench that had been previously emptied by drones. So drones, you knocked out your enemy in this trench, but you cannot put drones in the trench to keep it under control. So when Ukrainian drones kill Russians in the trench, and there are Ukrainian soldiers who cross the field, jump in the trench, and then Russian drones come and destroy Ukrainian soldiers, Russian soldiers come in, Ukrainian drones return. So the technological thinking in the end is centered about the issue of knocking out enemy soldier, a human being, and protecting your soldier from being knocked out. So whatever kind of technology we're thinking about, we should remember two things. And this is our lesson, and we may be wrong, we may be biased, but I'm here to share it with you. War is getting cheaper, and the motivation to fight, the ways to fight is cheaper to keep. And, but in the end, whatever the advance of technology is, it's all about human beings. And if you do not have a soldier who has the nerve to stay in the trench under the drone fire, you're not going to win. Everyone is looking at Europe now. Of course, it has become a common sense that Ukraine is fighting not only for itself, but for Europe. 6 months ago, you would have also heard many people saying that Ukraine fights for democracy, but that doesn't sell in America anymore. So you don't hear that. You don't hear people saying that. Europeans, why Europeans stand by Ukraine? It is not because they are warmongers, as many commentators in the United States want to belonging to a certain camp try to present it. It's because Europeans feel the physical threat coming from Russia. This is not what you feel, you may feel in the United States, but this is what Europeans feel. And now you see the great awakening of Europe. Europe is reconsidering its security, its approach to security. Europe will be investing a lot in its security. The only question that really matters now is the timing. So now we know that Europe is willing to take its security seriously. And by the way, I was always in support of President Trump's demand to Europe to spend more money on defense and on NATO membership, even during his first tenure in office. This argument always made perfect sense to me. But today, Europe wants to spend money. Europe has the money. The only question is time. And here is what is happening. The stronger Europe gets in terms of security, the weaker the United States and Russia become in their capability to impose their will on Europe. But the key here is that the longer Ukraine fights, the more time Europe gets to strengthen its security and become capable. Which brings us to the conclusion that President Trump and President Putin are not necessarily interested in having strong Europe, which in the end may mean that the pressure on Ukraine will only continue to increase in order to reach the point when it will have to accept something unacceptable before Europe becomes strong enough to to elevate its role in the process. Now, this is all foreign policy thinking exposed, thinking out loud with you. You feel free to challenge, to ask questions. Now I have the freedom of saying everything I want to say, not all what I have to say. So not everything I'm saying should be 100% correct. But before I wrap up, I want to take this story to the ultimate level, which is the nukes. Right? So there is a war. Someone is fighting for the good cause. Someone is fighting for the bad cause. We are helping the side that we want to help. But in the end, we all keep in mind that there is the nukes story. European sense of security was always based on the assumption that they enjoy the American nuclear umbrella. You may have heard President Macron saying that he is willing to explore how to replace American nuclear umbrella for Europe. This is a very welcoming and encouraging conversation. The problem is that the whole nuke strategy and nuke doctrine is built on two levels of argument. The first one says, like, do you have nukes or you don't? Okay, if you do, let's sit and talk. And this is where Europe passes the test. It has the nukes. But then comes the second test, which I call the Stalin test. And I call it this way because there is this famous anecdote when Stalin was asked by the end of the Second World War to pay greater attention to the Pope, to Vatican, and his political capabilities. He listened carefully to the person who brought this idea to him, and he asked him a simple question in return. He said, how many divisions does Pope have? Right? So this is the second level of conversation, is how big are you for me to treat you respectfully? Replace divisions with nukes warheads, and this is where Europe fails the test. Because England, United Kingdom, and France, taken all together, have the number of warheads incompatible with the number of warheads in the possession of Russia. This is not going to fly. It's a myth. It's a legend. European umbrella, nuclear umbrella, is impossible. So if Putin decides to wage a nuclear war, Europe, he simply has more warheads. So he will suffer, but Europe will suffer a lot. And deterrence doesn't work. Deterrence works when you are on more or less on par, and the only country that has it is the United States. Of course, there is China. China is not willing to destroy the world. It is about to begin to lead, with all my respect to the United States of America. So they have strong anti-nuclear feelings about that. But nevertheless, this nukes calculus actually it plays a role in the decisions made in Washington, in Berlin, in London, and Paris. And the mere threat coming from Putin, or the hint that he may use nuclear in order to achieve his goals in Ukraine, scares hell out of every Western capital. And this is a very strong argument that he resorted only once, that he only resorted once to. It was in autumn 2022, but it worked brilliantly, and he learned a lesson. So, the best way to fight to ensure security of Europe, Ukraine, and Europe is not to take it to the nukes level, because this is not the game we're going to win, and we can have a conversation why Putin is not going to use nukes, and I think he won't, but many people believe that he will. So I am considering this option together with you. And second, as long as Ukraine has the will to fight, and Europe has the capacity to fight, Trump and Putin can achieve very little. The problem is that, it means only one thing: the war will continue. Wars end in two cases. In the first case, at least one of the sides comes to the conclusion that the cost of running the war is unbearable, and the circumstances are unfavorable. And the second case is when at least one of the sides is put in a situation where it physically cannot continue the war. In the former case, wars end with negotiations. In the latter case, wars end with capitulation. The problem is, why do you still see the war in Ukraine? Because neither Ukraine nor Russia neither believe that the cost of the war is unbearable, nor are put in unbearable circumstances. And as long as this continues, I'm afraid we will be hearing air raid sirens, and you will be reading news from the front line in Ukraine. But in the end, we should always remember that no war lasts forever. There are only two truths about humanity that are unshakable. The first one, we all die. And the second one, all wars end one day, right? So there will be a day when this war will come to an end. The question is the price that will be paid by all of its stakeholders, primarily Ukraine. Ukraine is in the most vulnerable position here to see this war end. Finally, sometimes people say that I'm too grim and pessimistic and sobering. I'm not. I'm very optimistic, and I believe that there are good things awaiting us ahead. I just believe that to be able to secure a better future, you have to realistically assess the situation. You have to get things right. If you do not get things right, and this country knows it very well from many wars it took part in, if you do not get the things right, motivations right, resources available right, you are going to lose. With a saved face or without a saved face, but you are going to lose. So the purpose of everything I'm saying is just to help get things right and to find the solutions that can take us to peace at the lowest possible price. And this is why when the war started, I have adopted two quotes as my personal kind of slogans or mottos. The first one is by Dwight Eisenhower, who said that pessimists never win wars. And the second one is, I believe, people's wisdom, but others believe these words have an author, and they are this: in the end, everything will be fine, and if it is not fine, then this is not the end. Thank you.
That was fabulous.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for coming, and thank you so much for your analysis of the situation today. Let me pick up sort of in the middle of your talk, when you were talking about the role of soldiers, when you were talking about the trenches and everything. How do you assess military morale today within Ukraine, within the Ukrainian military? And in the wider population, how do you assess the tolerance for 2 years, 1 year, 6 months, whatever it turns out to be, for being hit every night? I mean, I get reports every day about X number of missiles and X number of drones and everything else. Is there a point at which the population at large may say, it's enough, let's save what we can?
Well, you cannot get used to being bombed every night. but you can learn how to live with it. So I was in the city of Dnipro a week ago, literally the Friday before the last one, upon the invitation of the local business community. And we had a meeting in a restaurant. And I met a man, and then the Shahed attack on Dnipro started. And it got so intense that the roof of the restaurant was shaking, and we had to go from the second floor to the first one. And it got even worse. There were explosions, and the air defense was trying to intercept them. So we were advised to leave the restaurant and go to the proper shelter. And on the way out, a man who was one of the business leaders in Dnipro, he shook my hand and he said, "Come again. I'll take you to next time we have a dinner at my restaurant, which is the best in Dnipro." And I told him sure, and we rushed out. So in 30 minutes, Shahed hit that restaurant and it burned down. Oh. So next morning when I woke up and called not the man but a friend of his who invited me to Dnipro, they were already, and I said, what are you going to do about it? And he said, well, first we are now raising money to help those who had been hit last night, and then he will rebuild this restaurant because he will show everyone that he will show the Russians that no one can destroy him. Nothing can destroy us. So this is I think this is the story that more or less describes where we are. Now, we Ukrainians are grumpy people, right? So we are unhappy, we complain, we find a lot of injustices in life, and some of them are true. But in the end, the country has been fighting for 3 years. Almost 1 million people, if not 1 million people, are on the front line. There is enormous criticism of mobilization and I would say intolerance to it, but it continues. And so I wouldn't expect the will of, we complain, but we do our job. That's how I would describe. And the first time so the war started in February and in the end of February, and in May 2022, the Davos World Economic Forum was taking place in Switzerland, and it was in May because of the pandemic, not in February or not in January, that is usually the case. So March, April, and half of May, 2.5 months. So 2.5 months into the war, you still hear all these statements about solidarity and support for Ukraine. I go to Davos because I was the foreign minister and I had to do that. I talk to people and everyone is speaking about solidarity and resolve on the stage. And the same people walking off the stage tell me, Dmytro, this is it. We cannot run it anymore. We are tired. We're exhausted. War fatigue is Dominic. I said, guys, hold on for a second. I come from a country whose existence in the next months is not guaranteed yet, and you tell me that you got tired. I mean, there is something wrong. How can you get tired while we are still fighting? So in September, I heard exactly the same narrative at the United Nations General Assembly. So you cannot get used to being bombed, but you can get used to people complaining how tired they are, either of fighting or supporting the fight. But in the end, it just rolls over from one year into another, and the fight continues.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to ask you about the negotiations, and obviously all the conversation now has turned to what Trump is saying and what the concessions that the Russians claim that they want to get from him. I'm curious if anything is still going on in Saudi Arabia, if there's any movement. The list of what Ukrainians were hoping for, and I felt the Ukrainians had a lot to argue for. The control over the Black Sea, it's in the Ukrainian hands. But the issue of can we get civilians back? Can we get children back? Is there any movement on any of that? Or is it just playing out between Washington and Moscow and there's not much hope for negotiations which take week in and week out, sitting down and saying, let's get to a ceasefire of this kind?
So after the incident in the Oval Office, President Zelensky took the right stance and he started endorsing Trump's initiatives. It's a very wise thing to do when you're fighting for your life. And you saw Ukraine agree saying, ceasefire, sure, fine. Ceasefire on the sea, excellent. Energy ceasefire, fabulous. Because we know that we will not get there, not because of us, but because of Putin. It's a very fundamental thing to get. If you believe that Trump believed that Putin is seeking the deal as well. Mm-hmm. But now he comes to realize that he didn't, that he doesn't. And if he doesn't, then if it is true that he's not seeking the deal, but excuses or smokescreen for continuing the war, then all ceasefires are doomed to fail, by definition. After the meeting in Jeddah, the second one, when Ukrainians met with the Americans and Americans met with the Russians, and before that, Trump had spoken with Putin and with Zelensky, read the statements of the White House, from the United States, from Ukraine, and from Russia on these ceasefires. And you will read that these are three completely different statements.
Exactly.
So even today, I, as a person who is supposed to understand the things, I do not know whether we actually have the energy ceasefire, or whether the Black Sea ceasefire holds, or whether it was introduced at all. Because there was a mess in messages, and the goal was clear, not to have them. So Zelensky did the right thing. He will support all of these beautiful initiatives. Although he is, and those of you who know history of the Vietnam War well may think, oh yeah, Zelensky behaves like the South Vietnamese president who did not speak against Kissinger negotiating with North Vietnam because he never believed they would come to an agreement. But this is a different case because Zelensky is ready to come to an agreement, unlike the guy from Vietnam back then. And second, even if America and Putin try to agree to something and impose it on Zelensky, he has the capacity not to accept it. And these are very important details. Now I want you to understand two more things. Energy ceasefire. So energy ceasefire plays more in favor of Russia than of Ukraine, because our energy infrastructure is destroyed anyway. So we have very little to lose. One of the few things where we could really inflict damage deep in Russia and make the Russians feel the war was by hitting their energy infrastructure, their oil refineries. We are not hitting electricity grid, by the way. So when Russia hits our energy infrastructure, Ukrainian cities are blacked out. When Ukraine hits Russian energy infrastructure, maybe prices on gas stations fluctuate slightly. But this is a big difference between what they hit and what we hit. The Black Sea ceasefire also is more beneficial to Russia than to Ukraine because, we keep our export sea corridor functioning even under these conditions, and Russia cannot undermine it and cannot destroy it. Ships safely reach our ports and leave our ports because we destroyed the physical capability of Russia to pose a threat to our sea corridor. The real ceasefire that would matter and would genuinely show the will of Russia to start the process is to stop firing missiles and drones on Ukrainian cities. This is the real ceasefire. So when you hear both sides speaking about that ceasefire as a first step, this will be the indicator that it's getting serious, right? As long as no one is talking about not firing on cities, which is purely about killing civilians and destroying civilian infrastructure, this is all just a smokescreen, I'm afraid.
So we're going to do
You wanna
one
ask
more
another
round?
question?
Okay, yeah. So I guess my other question would be, what would a settlement look like? I realize this is hypothetical, but what would a settlement look like? Is it a return to the 2014 boundaries? Does it mean the expulsion of all Russian troops from all internationally recognized Ukrainian territories? Could Ukraine settle for something less than that? What would be the security guarantees, not the way Trump keeps using them or Zelensky, but in order to maintain some kind of a permanent, at least long-term ceasefire, if not a peace?
I am a completely wrong person to talk about
Okay.
the concessions Ukraine should make. First, not because I'm a former senior official and I more or less know what we were ready to accept, but because I'm a citizen of Ukraine and I care for my country, and I'm not willing to make any suggestions that would work, that would undermine its position. Are Ukrainians willing to end the war? Yes, absolutely. Will Ukrainians accept the war, the outcome of the war that will legally take their territories away from them and guarantee impunity for Russia? No, they are not ready to accept that. This is more or less the corridor that we are in.
Okay. Fair answer.
And I'll ask one more question, and then we open up to the floor. I'm curious, you talked very movingly about the situation in Europe and how Europe may get stronger because of this situation. What's your prognosis of the kinds of pressures on the Europeans as you see it as a Ukrainian, as you see it as someone who's dealt with them as an ambassador? What will help them stay more united, and are there things we should be watching that suggest that there are more cracks, more divisions? How optimistic are you that they can hold while the two other powers continue to play footsie?
Fear is the only thing that keeps Europeans united. This is the best motivation. And there are two kinds of fear. The first one is losing their security, because elites in Europe understand that first you lose security, and then first goes security and then goes prosperity. The situation is not as good with the public opinion, which is divided still in Europe. And the second fear, which are more elevated Europeans are concerned about, is the fear of undermining the unity of the European Union. So for them, they are in this tricky situation now when they understand that they cannot be efficient in guaranteeing Europe's security within the framework of the European Union, because not only because of the nasty Hungary that can block something, but because every country will be pulling the strings inside in order to kind of direct the decision-making process in its favor, and this string pulling will simply slow down the decision. They will be wasting time holding councils, ministerials, and consultation. So they feel tempted to move towards format of the coalition of the willing, but they're torn between the risk of setting a precedent when something that must be done, that shall be done as a common policy, will be done as a policy of some. This is the fear that they're facing. The fear of, you have to know, the biggest fear of Europeans is to undermine, to shatter the unity of the Union. This is what they will always be because so much effort was invested in making it work that this is something that they are seriously afraid of.
Great. All right, so there are microphones on both sides of the room. Please
Just go to
line
the
up
mic.
if you want to. You have to use the mic, otherwise the film can't pick you up. Please identify yourself and please actually ask a question and not make a statement. We'll start over there. Go ahead, please.
Can you hear me? Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dmytro, for the speech. I'm junior at Halt International Business School here in Boston, and I just have a quick question about the foreign investments. So how do you think private capital, especially from foreign investments, can be part of Ukraine's rebuilding, especially in the infrastructure? And what policy reforms or initiatives has Ukraine implemented or plans to implement to attract these impact-focused investments? Thank you.
There will be no major investments until the war ends. Everyone you hear talking about investments, big investments in Ukraine, is distorting reality. People want security. If I invest in building a piece of infrastructure, I want to be sure that it will not be destroyed with a missile tomorrow. Having said this, some minor investments are taking place, and we appreciate it. They are being done by the business, either local businesses who have the balls to do it, or foreign businesses who are ready to take higher risk. But these are two marginal groups. The majority investors will come after security is ensured. The regulatory framework is being improved steadily as part of our accession talks with the European Union. So on that track, things will continue to improve. But the main thing for an investor is security. I have to make sure that when I dig my money in here, they will not be blown up tomorrow.
Please.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming to us and talking to us. My name is Darina. I'm a student at MIT Sloan Business School. My question would be about China. So we just got the news about 2, I think, prisoners of war captured in Ukraine from China. And the question is, how do you, if this is confirmed that China is somehow participating in the war from Russian side, how would this impact Ukraine-US relationship, and what's the overall role of China in this war? Thank you.
Well, now that the United States are gone, and second, President Trump himself does not write off China as available as a partner in potential settlement, it creates completely new dynamics for Ukraine's and Europe's engagement with China. And China will be the main beneficiary of what is happening today in the United States in the long run. So you abolished USAID. Guess who came to the countries where you were implementing these projects and said, so tell us, what do you need? It was China. You withdrew from multilateralism. I tell you with 100% guarantee that China will fill in every void that you have created. So it's regrettable, but you have the right to do it. This is not, I respect the right of countries to make mistakes. But, so, and to be completely honest, like many countries of the world will be looking around and they will see that China is the only sane power, that you can actually, that is stable, that is predictable, that knows what it knows what it wants today and what it will want in 10 years or in 50 years. So, and this predictability has become a luxury in international affairs. So, the role of China is elevated. President of the European Commission held a phone call today, guess with whom? with the Prime Minister of China, the second person. It's the right thing to do. I fully endorse it, because if America behaves like this, then Europeans should turn their faces to China. The biggest obstacle on the path, I mean, there are many, but we have to keep things simple and comprehensible. The biggest obstacle on the way to cooperation between China and Europe is German automotive industry. Now that this automotive industry is kind of looking for money to survive, there is more room for this engagement. But even before Europe reaches its red lines with China, there are so many things. The distance between where we currently are and EU's red lines with China is so long that there are so many things that China and Europe can do courting each other, changing the balance and sending a clear message to the United States and using China as a leverage in their relations with the US. Now, after what Trump administration has done to Ukraine, of course Ukrainians will, and I hope that President Zelensky is seeking contacts with China, maybe through back channels, I don't know how, but that is the right thing to do. Capturing 2 Chinese soldiers, and the way it was advertised today, is, in my view, is an invitation to talk. But I would guess that these are just Chinese who lived in Russia and signed contracts with the Russian army. It is not compared to the involvement of North Korea in the war. And China will, I don't know how many people, what is the population of China today, but 2 do not count for them, right? So I would interpret what happened today as an invitation to talk. And there will be more of these things for the reasons that I mentioned before.
Please.
Good afternoon, and thank you again for coming to talk with us. My name's Isaac, and I'm a senior at Harvard. And my question has to do with sort of what happens when the war ends. So at the conclusion of the war, Ukraine will have one of the most combat experienced militaries in all of Europe, especially in this sort of large-scale combat operation. So my question is about how Ukraine could possibly leverage this experience to enhance the security of Europe and enhance the readiness of other European nations.
It doesn't matter how strong your army is. Army with handicaps but with a combat experience is better than your army. And this is why the balance on the Korean peninsula has already shifted. Because it doesn't matter how technologically advanced and equipped South Korean army is, North Koreans actually know how to fight. And when, like 4 or 5 months ago, you saw the reports in the news, including in the United States, turning the North Koreans in Russia into a laughingstock. They watch porn clips, they cannot fight. I was still the minister, and I was telling colleagues, like, stop laughing. These guys are just learning how to fight. And since for Kim Jong-un, the number of North Koreans who are going to die does not matter, he will gain the experience. His army will gain the experience. And when media reported and politicians celebrated the withdrawal of North Koreans from the front line because of the heavy casualties and low efficiency, again, I told everyone, they will be back. They will learn the lesson. They will refresh themselves, and they will come back. And this is exactly what happened. And at least 2 North Korean regiments fought in the Kursk region against Ukrainian. And we only captured 2 prisoners of war, because North Koreans prefer to die than to be taken as prisoners of war. We capture thousands of Russians per day. In 7 months of fight or so in Kursk, we only captured 2 North Koreans. So this is not the question, I'm not answering directly about Ukraine here, but I want to send the message that every army that gets battle experience in this war elevates its position for years to come vis-a-vis armies who do not have the experience. And this is why it is a stupidity that Europeans are so afraid of sending any soldier, not as a combat force, but at least to be in Ukraine. And this is why actually Macron came up with this idea. He was not talking about combat forces a year ago. They're not talking about combat forces now. But he just wanted, as military say, he wanted soldiers to get a sense, to get a smell of a gunpowder. But the Europeans are so afraid of making the move that they put themselves in this disadvantageous position. On Ukraine, yeah, we will have the strongest combat force in Europe. West European armies already learned from Ukrainian army. That's clear. I would assume that you will see a lot of Ukrainians in private military companies because our veterans will seek their fortune else. Many of our veterans will seek their fortune elsewhere. You may see a more assertive foreign policy of Ukraine in the regions where its security capabilities will be needed. In fact, you have already heard about some countries in Africa where Ukraine is present. So yeah, we will be a strong security force, and of course our defense industry will be one of the major players. We actually were one of the major players before the war, but mainly because we were selling out the Soviet equipment. Now this time we will be a major force by selling combat-proven equipment developed and advanced by Ukrainian companies.
Great. Please.
Hi, good evening. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Orest Kulevich. I actually lived in Ukraine with my family partially during the Kravchuk era and then later during Yushchenko's time and Yanukovych's time. So I still remember when I saw you 3 years ago saying like, wow, foreign policy in Ukraine has really changed dramatically. So I have a 2-part question. The first question is, how would you characterize the foreign service in Ukraine today, the talent pool, the people coming in and the future? And the second is, will there be an election this year, and how will that impact the trajectory of the war? Thank you.
In terms of the return on investment, Ukrainian foreign service is the best in the world. I'm not exaggerating. It's not because I ran it for 4.5 years. It's because if you compare the budget that is given to a foreign service and the deliverables of the foreign service, you can rank. I mean, there is no such chart, so I'm free to make the claim. No one is going to fact check me, but I know it from the inside, and I know how other foreign services operate. With the scarcest resources available, with the unprecedented level of challenges, we delivered the result that other foreign services would not deliver with this amount of resource. So in terms of ROI, we are the best, right? But of course, we have many shortcomings. We are not perfect. The biggest problem is human capital. Millions of people left Ukraine, fled the war. We had when I was appointed as the minister, we gradually reached the situation when we had 200 people applying for one position. And I was proud of this result because we made the ministry as a player on the market, and we were able to choose the best. When 2 years into the war, we had 3-4 people applying for one position. Simply because while the prestige of the work has skyrocketed, like hit the ceiling, but hit through the roof, but there were just no people. And then because embassies, foreign embassies in Ukraine and international organizations and NGOs, they began to roll out their infrastructure in Ukraine. They started sucking out our resources with higher salaries, with social, with many other benefits that I was not able to offer because I operate within a certain budget. Even still we remain competitive, but the situation got much worse. I don't know whether there will be elections in Ukraine this year. I know for certain that every politician in Ukraine thinks about elections now. I believe these people act against the interest of Ukraine by thinking too much about elections, because we should all think about one thing, which is winning the war. And when you begin to think about elections, you begin to make different choices. And these choices are not helpful. So I hope there won't be elections in Ukraine this year. I sincerely hope. The problem is that before the Oval Office incident, President Trump and President Putin wanted elections in Ukraine because they saw it as an opportunity to remove Zelensky. But after the Oval Office, because Ukrainians were insulted and decided to unite around their president and his rating of approval seriously improved, I would guess that now Zelensky wants to hold elections, but Putin and Trump don't. So there is this equilibrium. It's really too early. You may read reports from Ukraine. Someone is preparing. Yes, they are all preparing. They are all working on it. They are all trying to sell themselves in Washington and elsewhere. But too early. It's a false start, and it's a false start against Ukraine's interests.
Please.
Thank you so much for coming to speak with us here today. My name is Eitan Goldstein. I'm a senior at Harvard College. My question is, how has Trump coming to the U.S. presidency changed, if at all, Ukrainian diplomacy or outreach to the global south? Does Ukraine, do you think going forward, countries such as the Gulf monarchies or India can help Ukraine win this war? Thank you.
Well, I have to be fair here. We did a lot of great things together with the United States in between February 2022 and January 2025 in the global south, like really good things. But one of the lessons I learned from this experience, and I say it with utmost respect and gratitude to the United States, the times when a phone call from Washington would make someone in the global south change their mind in the blink of an eye are gone. And the same, to the extent that in a number of African countries, in 2 different African countries, their officials openly told me, Dmytro, if you want us to do something for Ukraine, please tell our friends in Washington, Paris, and London not to call us. You should call us instead. Because when they call us, we smile, but our primary instinct is to do the opposite of what they are asking. So, again, we have to be very realistic about the real leverage of the West in the global South. One of the mistakes we made is actually adopting this cliche of global south. And I was vehemently fighting against it, along with Catherine Colonna, the French foreign minister, because global south implies the division, the opposition to global north. No, we're not, is anyone using the term global north? Probably not, right? The Russian narrative has always been that this is the war in Ukraine is the war of the West against the rest. The mission of Russia is to liberate the rest from the power of the West. The West says, no, no, it's not true. We are not enemies of the rest. And then comes out and says, and by the way, all of you guys are global south. You in Africa, you in Asia, you in Latin South America, in Africa, you in MENA, you in Sub-Saharan, you are all global south. Who wants to be thrown into one basket? Everyone wants to be respected and treated on a separate basis. Everyone. And the West has adopted this notion of global south, putting everyone in one basket and basically reinforcing the Russian message that the rest exists. We failed, Catherine and I, because it became this words, global south became a common wisdom. Everyone started using it. So even I use it now for the sake of brevity, but it's a wrong thing. And we need a different intellectual framework to describe the world if we do not want to play into the hands of the Russian narratives. So in a nutshell, I don't think much changed with the arrival of Trump in the global south, right? You see, I said it. Because he just, they learned how to live with this war under Biden, and they don't see how Trump's moves impact them. But what happened is the good thing that happened. There is actually two consequences that I can highlight. The first one is South Africa, because Trump administration attacked South Africa. They felt and Ukraine. There emerged a common ground, and I know that President Zelensky is going to visit South Africa soon. The visit that we fought for years for, and it never worked, and all of a sudden it does. I think there is an element of Trump arrival in it. And of course, we see the dawn of Saudi Arabia as not as a global power, but as a big player in global affairs. The fact that all find them acceptable, and Saudi Arabia are ready to take the risks of being in the middle of the effort that does not necessarily will deliver, puts them in a special position. Even if it fails, and even if Jeddah agreement will never hit the headlines, the fact that they were in the middle takes them to the next level in foreign affairs, leaving others behind. So they will be like China and the United States at the top, but Saudis will be just below them.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yeah.
We're coming to the end.
Gotcha. I'll make sure to keep this quick, but thank you for your time, Dr. Kuleba, or Tiakuyu, if my Ukrainian's right. I have 200 questions I'd want to ask, but I'll keep it brief. You touched on this briefly during the last question, but in terms of international justice and geopolitical relations, we're going into the 4th year of the war. But that said, Ukraine has been supported by a coalition of the willing at the present. So question for you, between punishing war criminals, Russian war criminals and hostilities in Ukraine, to multilateral negotiations, do you feel that there's a sense of trust among Ukrainians in terms of international institutions since the outbreak of the war? Or do Ukrainians feel, by and large, that they're on their own, and even at post-settlement, that they'll be negotiating a new landscape?
No, the trust in institutions is ruined, of course. In some cases, it's unfair towards the institutions, but it doesn't change the status quo. Ukrainians learned one thing. The problem with Ukrainian mindset over the last 30 years since our independence was about two things. First, we sincerely believed that the whole world should like us because we are nice. No, we literally believed. And we struggled to understand why we face certain issues with other countries. What do they want from us? We are nice people. We gave up fourth largest nuclear arsenal. You should all adore us and carry us in your arms. And that never kind of happened. And the second issue was always that Ukrainians were thinking like, if we end up in a problem, others will come to help us, and we will kind of add our effort to their assistance. 3 years later, we began to realize that it works kind of the other way around. That this is what you invest, and then you can hope that partners will add to what you have invested, but not the other way around. And you should always keep in the equation that partners may not do that. And this is what we learned. The first big lesson was in the early days of the war, when we saw how reluctantly things began to unfold. The second big lesson was when the United States had been deliberating the supplemental in the Congress for 7 months, and we lived without any US assistance for 7 months, and we fought. Europeans were trying to do something. We were ramping up production. And the third lesson was, of course, when Trump said, this is it, I'm not sending anything anymore. And we are not perfect, okay? We have it's not that I complain on everyone. We are not perfect. We also went through these iterations of learning the lessons, but in the end, we realized that the only people, I keep saying Ukrainians are always afraid of someone sending Ukraine down the drain. There is literally saying, Україну зливають. Like Trump зілє Україну, in English it's Trump is going to send Ukraine down the drain. And I was always, since 2014, I was telling everyone who was interested in my unsolicited opinion, the unpleasant truth. The only being that can send Ukraine down the drain is a Ukrainian. This is, no one can do that. Doesn't matter how strong you are. As long as you yourself stand for Ukraine in every way available to you, no one will be able to break you down. But it takes time for the nation to kind of come to this conclusion.
Great. So I've been asked to announce the last STAR Forum of the semester, which will take place on Wednesday, April 16th. The U.S. and the world under Trump, the first 100 days. If you're interested, if you signed up for this, you should automatically get an email. And I hope that you'll join me now in thanking Minister Kuleba for his wonderful conversation.